Giant dog meets newborn twins. What happens next will melt your heart. They said he was too dangerous. They said he couldn't be trusted. But when Sarah and Michael brought their newborn twins home, their massive dog did something that left everyone speechless. Sarah's hands trembled as she fastened the car seat buckles for what felt like the 100th time. Behind her, Michael adjusted the second car seat, his movements equally nervous. After 9 months of anticipation, countless doctor visits, and sleepless nights preparing the nursery, they were finally bringing their twin babies home. But beneath the joy, beneath the overwhelming love that flooded their hearts, lurked a fear they hadn't spoken aloud during the entire drive from the hospital. What would Atlas do? Atlas wasn't just any dog. He was a Great Dane, a magnificent creature with a coat of midnight black interrupted by splashes of pure white across his chest and paws. Standing on his hind legs, he could easily rest his massive head on Michael's shoulder. At 140 pounds, he outweighed Sarah by 20 pounds, even after she'd lost the baby weight. For 5 years, Atlas had been their entire world, their first baby, their companion on morning runs, their shadow during dinner preparations, their warm presence at the foot of their bed every night. He greeted them with unbridled enthusiasm whenever they returned home, his tail wagging with such force it could clear a coffee table in seconds. But now everything was about to change. "Maybe we should have done this differently," Sarah whispered as they pulled into the driveway. She glanced back at the twins, little Emma with her shock of dark hair and Liam with his sweet button nose, both sleeping peacefully in their carriers. Michael squeezed her hand. "Atlas loves us. He'll love them too. But what if he doesn't understand? What if he gets jealous?" The fear wasn't unfounded. Sarah's sister had warned them during the baby shower, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Great Danes are unpredictable around infants. One snap of those jaws and... She'd left the sentence hanging, but the implication was clear. Michael's father had been more direct. "You need to rehome that dog before something terrible happens. I've read stories." Even their pediatrician had raised concerns during the final prenatal visit, asking pointed questions about Atlas's temperament, his training, his history with children. Each warning had planted seeds of doubt that grew into thorny vines of anxiety. Sarah and Michael had nodded politely, assured everyone that Atlas was gentle, that he'd never shown aggression. But alone at night, they'd lain awake wondering if love would be enough, wondering if instinct could overcome size and strength, wondering if they were being reckless parents before their children had even drawn their first breaths. The first week home passed in a blur of diaper changes, feeding schedules, and exhausted tears. Atlas, sensing the shift in his world, kept his distance. He'd approach the nursery door and pause, his ears perked, listening to the unfamiliar sounds, the mewling cries, the soft coos, the whispered lullabies. His tail would wag tentatively, but he never crossed the threshold without permission. Sarah noticed how he'd watch from the hallway when she rocked the babies. His dark eyes followed her movements, tracking the bundles in her arms with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Was it curiosity, confusion, or something more dangerous? At night, when the twins cried, and they cried often, their voices rising in tandem like an orchestra of need, Atlas would pace the hallway. Back and forth, his nails clicking against the hardwood floor. Sometimes he'd whine softly, a sound Sarah had never heard from him before. It wasn't distress exactly, but something close to it, as if he understood something was wrong, but didn't know how to fix it. "He's stressed," Michael observed one morning after another sleepless night. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Maybe we should keep him separated longer." Sarah's heart clenched. I don't want him to feel abandoned. He's been our family for 5 years. But the babies. I know. Sarah's voice cracked. I know. The tension in their home grew thick as fog. Every time Atlas moved near the nursery, Sarah's muscles tensed. Every time he barked, at the mailman, at a passing car, she jumped, her protective instincts flaring. She began closing the nursery door completely, creating a physical barrier between her children and the dog she'd once trusted implicitly. Atlas noticed. Of course he noticed. He began sleeping by the closed nursery door instead of on his bed. He ate less. His tail wagged less frequently. The joyful, exuberant dog they'd known seemed to be fading, replaced by a confused, melancholy shadow. We can't keep going like this, Michael finally said on day 12. We need to let them meet, properly, really meet. Sarah's stomach nodded. What if the warnings were right? Then we'll deal with it. But Sarah, look at him. Michael gestured toward Atlas, who sat in the hallway with his head resting on his paws, staring at the closed nursery door with an expression that could only be described as longing. He's heartbroken. And I don't think it's jealousy. I think he wants to be part of this. That afternoon, when both twins were awake and calm, a rare miracle, they made their decision. Sarah spread a plush, cream-colored blanket on the nursery floor, her hands shaking slightly. Michael gently placed Emma on one side, then Liam on the other. The twins, now 2 weeks old, had begun to focus their eyes on faces. They blinked up at the ceiling, their tiny fists waving in the air like conductors leading an invisible symphony. Are you ready? Michael asked, his hand on the doorknob. Sarah's mouth went dry. Every warning echoed in her mind. Every worst-case scenario she'd imagined played like a horror film. But she looked at her babies, so small, so vulnerable, so trusting, and then thought of Atlas, the dog who'd been by their side through job losses, family deaths, and cross-country moves, the dog who'd never shown them anything but devotion. I'm ready, she whispered. Michael opened the door. Atlas, come. The sound of Atlas's approach seemed magnified in the hushed room. His massive paws thudded against the floor, each step deliberate and careful. He appeared in the doorway, his enormous frame filling it completely. His head tilted slightly as his eyes found the babies on the blanket. Sarah positioned herself within arm's reach of the twins, her body coiled and ready to intervene. Michael stood on the other side, equally alert. The air felt electric with tension. Atlas took one step into the room, then another. His movements were slower than usual, more measured. He lowered his great head, his nostrils flaring as he caught the unfamiliar scent, powder and milk, and something indefinably new. The twins seemed to sense his presence. Emma's eyes widened, tracking the massive shape moving toward them. Liam's mouth formed a small O of surprise. Atlas stopped 2 feet away. He didn't bound forward with his usual enthusiasm. He didn't wag his tail with wild abandon. Instead, he simply looked. His gaze moved from Emma to Liam and back again, as if committing every detail to memory. The rise and fall of their tiny chests, the delicate curve of their cheeks, the impossibly small fingers that opened and closed reflexively. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. "Easy, boy," she breathed. "Easy." Emma made a sound, not quite a cry, but a soft, gurgling coo. Her right hand lifted from the blanket, reaching toward nothing in particular, as babies do. And then something extraordinary happened. Atlas sank down. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his massive body until he was lying on the floor, his head level with the twins. The movement was so gentle, so deliberate, that it took Sarah's breath away. This wasn't the clumsy, enthusiastic dog who knocked over furniture in his excitement. This was something entirely different. Atlas inched forward on his belly, closing the distance to less than a foot. His tail gave one tentative wag. Liam kicked his legs, a motion that in older children might be called excitement. His face scrunched in concentration as he turned his head toward Atlas. Emma's coo grew louder, her hand still waving in the air. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to pull them away, to create distance, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the look in Atlas's eyes, dark and gentle and filled with something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the way he moved, inch by careful inch, as if he understood the preciousness of what lay before him. Atlas extended his neck, bringing his nose close to Emma's outstretched hand. The baby's fingers, no bigger than matchsticks, brushed against his muzzle. Atlas froze. Emma made another soft sound, this one almost like a laugh. Then Liam, not to be outdone by his sister, let out a gurgling squeal. His legs kicked with more vigor, his whole body seeming to wiggle with infant joy. And Atlas responded. The massive dog shifted his attention to Liam, gently pressing his nose against the baby's belly. The touch was so light, so tender, that Liam's entire body shook with what could only be delight. He made a sound, something between a laugh and a squeak, that seemed to surprise even him. Emma, apparently jealous of her brother receiving attention, cooed louder. She waved her hand again, this time connecting solidly with Atlas's ear. The dog's ear flicked at the touch, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he turned back to Emma, allowing her tiny fingers to explore his face, his fur, his nose. Sarah realized she was crying. Tears streamed down her cheeks unchecked as she watched her massive dog, the one everyone had warned her about, interact with her newborns with more gentleness than she'd thought possible. His movements were calculated, careful, almost reverent. Michael's hand found hers, squeezing tight. When she looked at him, she saw his eyes were equally wet. Atlas lay there for 20 minutes, letting the twins touch him, smell him, hear the sound of his breathing. When Emma began to fuss, the warning sign that she was getting hungry, Atlas immediately backed away, giving them space. He retreated to the doorway and sat, his tail wagging slowly, his gaze never leaving the babies. From that moment, everything changed. Atlas appointed himself the twins' guardian. When they slept, he slept near their cribs, his massive body a barrier between them and the world. When they cried at night, he'd trot to the nursery first, pressing his nose through the crib bars as if to say, "I'm here, you're safe." If the crying continued, he'd come to Sarah and Michael's room, giving a single soft bark, never loud enough to startle, just enough to wake them. During the day, he'd lie beside their playmat, letting them grab his fur, poke his nose, and, when they got older, use him as a support to pull themselves up. He never complained, never snapped, never showed even a flicker of irritation. The neighbors who'd warned Sarah and Michael started to see something different during their daily walks. They saw how Atlas positioned his bulk between the stroller and traffic, how he'd lower himself to the ground when the twins were placed on a blanket at the park, creating a living fortress around them, how his eyes tracked every person who came near, not with aggression, but with watchful vigilance. "I've never seen anything like it," Sarah's sister admitted during a visit 3 months later. She watched as Atlas allowed Emma to use his leg as a teething toy while Liam napped against his side. "I was wrong about him, completely wrong." But the most remarkable moment came on a crisp autumn afternoon when the twins were 6 months old and just beginning to pull themselves up. Sarah had placed them on their favorite playmat, the same cream-colored blanket from their first meeting with Atlas, surrounded by toys. Atlas lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, content to simply watch. Emma grabbed a toy block and threw it with the wild abandon of an infant discovering cause and effect. It bounced off Atlas's nose. He didn't flinch. Liam, not to be outdone, began pulling himself toward his sister, his chubby arms working hard, his determination clear. But he was unsteady, wobbling dangerously. Atlas lifted his head, watching intently. When Liam's arms threatened to give out, when he began to tip sideways, Atlas moved. He extended his massive paw with impossible precision, placing it gently on the mat beside Liam, not touching the baby, but creating a support, a brace. Liam's tiny hand found Atlas's leg. He gripped the fur and pulled himself upright, standing for the first time in his young life. Emma, seeing her brother's accomplishment, grabbed Atlas's other leg and did the same. The twins stood there, their little bodies swaying but stable, held up by their own determination and the gentle support of a 140-pound dog who understood, somehow, what they needed. Sarah dropped the laundry basket she'd been holding. Michael rushed in from the kitchen, alerted by her gasp. They stood together, watching their babies take their first supported stands, watched over by the dog everyone had said was too dangerous, too big, too unpredictable. "He chose them," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "From that first moment, he chose them." Michael wrapped his arm around her waist, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Atlas looked up at them then, his tail thumping against the floor, his expression somehow conveying both pride and devotion. His gaze seemed to say, "These are mine too. I will protect them. I will guide them. I will love them as you do." And in that moment, Sarah and Michael understood a profound truth. Sometimes the greatest guardians come in unexpected forms. Sometimes the ones others fear become the most gentle protectors. Sometimes love transcends size, species, and every warning we receive. Atlas had taught them that trust isn't about the absence of fear. It's about choosing to believe despite it. As the twins grew, Atlas would remain their constant companion, their first friend, their softest landing, their bravest protector. And years later, when Emma and Liam would be asked about their earliest memories, they wouldn't recall their nursery's colors, or their toys, or even their parents' faces with clarity. But they would remember warmth, safety, the gentle rumble of breathing, the soft texture of fur, the unwavering presence of love. They would remember Atlas. Have you ever witnessed an unexpected bond between a pet and a child that proved everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might give hope to someone facing similar doubts. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love comes in all sizes. Sometimes the biggest hearts come in the biggest packages.